Good afternoon to you all. It's time to get the 7th session of Leadership in Extraordinary Times this season going. My name is Eero Vara, and I'm Professor of Organizations and Impact at Side Business School at Oxford. And it's a great pleasure to wish you all very welcome to our panel discussion on the future of recruitment. And I really cannot think of a more important or exciting topic, given the ongoing changes in organizations and around them, which we are experiencing as we speak. And this really triggers a big need to reflect upon what the future of work will be like. Now, this panel has been planned and organized by my colleague, Dr. Greta Corporal, who is one of the world's leading experts in this area. And it's really thanks to Greta that we have this panel here and now. And she will also moderate the discussion, which makes my job easy. Minji Gao is having an eye on the questions, for which we are very grateful. I will keep this beginning part real short, but I want to briefly introduce our fantastic lineup of experts, and we really couldn't have a better lineup for us today. So the panelists include Paul Estes from Mural. He's a leading industry expert in the open talent economy. We have John Healy, Vice President and Managing Director, Office of the Future of Work at Kelly Services. We have Adam Ozimek, who's Chief Economist at Upwork. And we have Michael Kearns, CEO at Verticent. Great to have you here. And then Janine Leger, On-Demand Talent Offering Lead at Deloitte Pixel. The panel will be dealing with several issues, but we will focus in particular on two questions. First, the platform economy and the role of open talent. And then secondly, the potential of AI, that's artificial intelligence, in matching people with jobs. And at this point, I want to invite everyone in the audience to join in the panel discussion by submitting questions and comments through the chat function. And as promised, I'm keeping this brief. And at this point, without further ado, over to you, Greta.
Thank you very much, Eero. Thanks for a wonderful introduction. And as Eero said, the first theme we will talk about today is about the platform economy and the role of open talent. And I'm very pleased to have Adam Ozimek present with us. And to give a bit of context, with the rise of digital platforms like Google, Apple, and Facebook, we increasingly see that economic activity is being mediated by digital platforms. And whereas we know about some of these platforms we call gig economy, such as Uber and Deliveroo, we also see the emergence of what we call online labor platforms, where companies can find specialized experts through these platforms and to do work with them, engage them in the work that's taking place. And what I'm actually interested in, Adam, is can you tell us what's your perspective regarding how the platform economy will affect work and recruitment?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a great question. And I think that there are two important features of platform economies to consider. One is that they're global, and two is that they're highly flexible. So these are sort of the distinguishing features. Now, when you talk about flexible work, what it's most similar to is, the traditional staffing industry or just hiring independent contractors. So that's sort of the brick and mortar world version of it. But when you add in the global nature of it, that makes it something totally different, right? And that's what makes global platform economies like Upwork such a unique thing. And I think that the global nature is incredibly important because it means that businesses are no longer constrained to their local labor market. And this is such an important thing both for the businesses and for the workers and for the availability of opportunity across the world. So traditionally, a business looking to hire someone, they're going to focus in their backyard. They're going to look in the neighborhood of where their offices are. And that means you are constrained by the conditions of your local labor markets. And for a lot of businesses, this becomes an important challenge, especially if we look at, 2019. A lot of economies were heading towards what we call full employment, which basically means everyone who has a job wants one. And in that environment, it becomes very difficult to find high quality people, and it becomes very difficult to hire. And this difficulty is magnified by the fact that you're stuck looking in your backyard. So, especially when you're talking about businesses that are located in the most dynamic, expensive, high cost of living, fast growth cities. Think of, London, San Francisco, New York. These cities are places where the labor markets are even tighter than they are for average. So it becomes very hard to find people. So the first thing that global platforms do is they unlock labor everywhere. So that's really important because you have tremendous differences in the availability of workers by place. And across the United States, if you look at the tightest labor markets, focusing on 2019, the tightest versus the sort of loosest labor markets, there are places where there is a lot of talent available. And especially when you're talking about paying them at levels that they pay in these, superstar cities, opening that door to hiring anywhere is incredibly powerful. And then you add into that the flexibility that you don't need to make sort of long-term staffing decisions, but you can scale up and down very quickly. That's the other thing that sort of makes us unique. So those two things really set this aside from the rest of the labor market. It's most similar to traditional staffing, but in a lot of ways, it's completely different than that in terms of the global scale that you get, the speed of hiring that you get, and the flexibility that you get.
Thank you so much, Adam. Super interesting and very nice how you brought these different elements together. And one of the elements that you said, like unlocking the potential, unlocking labor, is what I believe Paul has started to call the democratization of opportunity, if I remember it well from the last time we spoke. And Paul, with the rise of online labor platforms, these models of work that leverage open talent are really coming into the mainstream, right? And in your recent book, you talk about the gig mindset, and I'm very happy to have a version of it here. And can you explain to us what is this open talent work model actually about, and what are its implications for workers and organizations?
First thing I want to do is say it's an honor to be on a panel with you, because it was, I think, 5 years ago that I attended an Upwork event, and you were on stage, and you had written some research about how Fortune 500 companies were adopting gig economy or freelance platforms. You handed me that research, which was in a hardbound book, and I took it, and it was one of the things that really helped me start the freelance program at Microsoft. So it's been a long journey in your work. I just want to say thank you for the work that you continue to do. When I talk to Fortune 500 companies, and I do it often as they're trying to think about innovation, and I say this often, I continue to believe that not having a gig economy strategy in 2020 is the same as not embracing the internet in 1990 or the mobile revolution in 2010. And so we all know the stories about companies who did not see a structural shift in the way work would get done, and then what happened to those companies, and the companies that did embrace that, and where they are today. And so I believe in many ways, we're starting to see freelancers and the gig economy and these open talent platforms structurally change many aspects of business. You asked a question of how should workers think about it and how should companies think about it. I think from a worker perspective, what we're starting to see is a lot of people are having side hustles. They're having more portfolio careers. And the idea that you're going to have one job and that's going to stay for 30 years, we know that that's not the case. And in reality, it's never really been the case. Workers are demanding flexibility. Companies are now providing that flexibility. And you're starting to see that shift. And so, I think more and more are going to reach into independent work, freelancing, as part of a portfolio career to reskill and to keep some sort of stability in their lives. when it comes to companies, and I wrote a piece in March in Fast Company, and I talk about location bias. It always struck me as odd that companies found the best talent, yet it had to be the best talent that was willing to move within 50 miles of their location. And that bias stops companies from really reaching their full potential and serving customers, right? And in companies that have primarily human capital as their major spend, they have a fiduciary responsibility to bring diversity into the work, because we know every university, including Oxford, has done research saying diversity provides better outcomes. And so if you're an executive and you're not bringing diversity and reaching out to the best talent wherever it may be, you're neglecting that fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders, to your employees, and to society overall. I mean, the talk now is, hey, how do we bring, as Adam spoke about, equality? How do we address the inequality that's happening in the world? And so I firmly believe that companies that are not adapting to remote work and independent work are really neglecting their fiduciary responsibility to their companies. And what we're seeing now is a lot of companies say, oh, remote work is okay. Remember, 6 months ago, it was an odd and even strange radical idea that teams didn't have to be around the water cooler. So that's a little bit about how I think about and talk to organizations about the open talent world.
Thank you so much, Paul. Very, very interesting. And one of the companies that is actually one of the front runners in this space is Deloitte. And very recently, they got featured in a Harvard Business case study. And I'm very glad Janine is actually with us today. And Janine, Deloitte established their own platform, Deloitte Pixel. And can you tell a bit about the behind the scenes, like how does Deloitte leverage this open talent model of work? What types of work lend itself to bring in these external specialists that Adam and Paul have been talking about? And how does this impact the organization or the structuration of work?
Yeah, thank you so much, Greta. And, thank you for putting together such an awesome panel of people in the open talent space. I think it's a really exciting time in talent and how it can change. And you've been, at the front, making sure that everyone's getting involved, everyone's engaging in these type of discussions. So a big thank you to you for pulling this together. So in short, we at Deloitte have been using open talent for the past 4 to 5 years. And it started with just how do we access this? How do we actually bring on-demand talent in a way that's truly on demand versus weeks and weeks of contracting to bring someone on that acts and feels like a traditional employee. And what we realized is you need to, as a large enterprise, you can go in so many different directions that focusing on 1 or 2 verticals to start and expanding from there is where you'll be able to get some success. So we at Deloitte have focused on how to use freelancers specifically in our strategy and analytics group. And where we've focused predominantly is with data science, as well as other skill sets in the analytics field that we could bring on freelancers in that area that are specialists that we might not have internally, that our Deloitte consulting teams could use. So specifically, bringing on a data scientist who has a niche capability that no one in Deloitte has, but our client needs a problem solved that they've hired us for, we can bring in a freelancer to help support the project team in the freelancers that we have. The freelancers that we have are individuals that the team can't find internally, but can bring on in the same fashion that they would bring someone from internally from Deloitte onto the team with. Because if you don't have that seamless approach, and it becomes really challenging and a huge time suck for a manager to bring on a freelancer versus bringing on someone internally, they'll revert to old ways. So that's a really important piece, is making it a seamless hiring experience when bringing on external talent. And to what Paul said, people and companies should really have a freelance strategy. They need a team behind this to make sure that the company understands, there is time and energy that goes into the back end to make bringing on freelance talent seamless. And I also do believe that freelance marketplaces across the board, we try and work with a number of different ones in our ecosystem. So we are freelance marketplace agnostic, and we'll just bring in the best one based on the talent that we need. And what we've seen is, all of them are adjusting to figure out how do we make technology support and be a useful tool to make the onboarding as seamless as possible. So huge strides have been made there by the platforms, and excited to see how that continues. Your last question was, how have we seen, how has it impacted work? And for us, it really is around taking away constraints from the team. So teams, I'm also just going to restart my video here. It seems like I can't. Sorry, there were some technical difficulties over there. But here we go. Can you see me now?
Yes.
I'm gonna take that as a yes. So it's no longer about, teams have this ability to say, it's no longer about, oh, we don't have the talent, I'm constrained in this way or that way, so we can't do this project for a client. It's, okay, we don't have the talents internally, how do we look at externally? So it's expanded the access to skill sets that we as Deloitte have and can serve our clients with, which is a huge win in the consulting world. And then the other aspect that has sort of changed significantly, and COVID has really helped with this, is just working remote. Most consultants previously, had a Monday through Thursday schedule where they would be in person with their clients. And we've been pushing Deloitte to really rethink who you need to be in person and who can be remote. And all the freelancers that we've worked with have been remote. And that shift was something that we were doing pre-COVID, but now with COVID has been a really easy way to get teams to adopt and use freelancers more regularly.
Right, that's great. Thank you, Janine. And as Paul already referred to, my team at Oxford, basically since 2017, we have been studying the adoption of online labor platforms and what impact that has had on the labor market, with me and my colleagues, especially looking at the implications, particularly for larger enterprises, such as the Fortune 500. And we saw that many of the organizations started to experiment with organizing work with open talent. And basically what we saw is that usually they started off with relatively simple tasks and projects, but gradually they also started to engage with platforms for larger and more complex projects. And that seems like where you're talking about, Janine. And also, Michael, please join us in the conversation, because you have a lot of insight, and also from Ferguson's point of view, like taking on these larger, more complex projects, what would it take for organizations to really leverage these platforms and bring in those external specialists for those more complex types of engagements?
Sure. I think one of the interesting things, and Adam sort of mentioned it earlier, was that the closest analog to the platforms are staffing. So people have always used outside experts to get work done, right? They just happen to come through staffing agencies or consulting firms and typically been kind of on premise. The difference now is just the platforms give you, as everyone has talked about, first, just global reach, right? So rather than if I'm in Cincinnati, finding experts in Cincinnati, which is a limited pool, I can find experts from all over the world. The second is typically the platforms are better, right? So the discovery process and different platforms do different things, but rather than the old method was you talk to a person who gives you a few resumes, et cetera, right? You can do it digitally. You can look at more scale. There's higher levels of vetting. There's more precision around matching. So it's less of I think one of the challenges has been, I think a lot of companies view this, and frankly, sometimes the industry positions it as this like radically new, totally different thing. The reality is it's It's just a better way to do what people have been doing always. And so I think from an adoption perspective, you hear, we've surveyed large companies around the world for years, and with my friend Dr. John Younger, and what we found is, the resistance is more fear of the unknown or fear of what's different than kind of tangible things, right? Because it's, well, if they're remote, how do I know they're working, right? And my response to that is, well, it's Cyber Monday here. Well, maybe not this year, but typically it's always been Cyber Monday in the United States. So that's the biggest shopping day of the year, which is the first Monday after Thanksgiving. If it was indeed true that people in the office are always working and people at home are always not, then why there's 3 days between US Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday? So why aren't the people doing all their holiday shopping over the weekend online? It's because they wait until they go back to work in the office to do their online shopping. Same with, Facebook peak times or during the workday. So there's this idea of how do I know they're working if they're remote? Well, it's actually, presence is not equal to productivity. So you should actually be a leader and kind of set expectations for people and measure progress, measure output, measure results, right? And that's true whether they're remote or right next to you. But also things like security and other things that, there are answers to, but people are concerned about. So I think that, for large companies, what we always say is, first start small, but also it's apply the same principles. I think most companies will find is an A player 3,000 miles away is orders of magnitude more effective than a C player sitting right next to you. And that's the reality, as Adam and others said. I think that in a lot of the larger cities, it is so hard to find the right people, and that's just math. So if I'm looking in a city of 3 million versus the world, mathematically, my chances of finding exactly the right person are dramatically greater if I look across the world. So you're basically trading kind of proximity for fit. And from my perspective, that doesn't make sense. And I think a lot of companies are seeing that like, it's not really that different. The different components are, it's a more effective matching process and you've got more options. And yeah, there is some proximity differences, but I think as we're all seeing now, because we're forced into it, those are easily solvable problems. And I predict that, we'll see, this has been a steady trend of increasing at year over year, kind of every year. I think it'll accelerate, obviously, because a lot of people have been forced into remote work. And I think most are seeing there's differences and there's problems to overcome, but for the most part, people are just, if not more productive, and kind of, it gives workers the freedom to be more flexible and not be forced into the most expensive, crowded cities. And it gives employers the flexibility to find the best person wherever they are. And I think we'll see that.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. And one thing, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work that people at Stanford have been doing about flash teams, where they have the idea that, when you have really complex projects, you kind of need to give these freelancers a space to work together, even though if it's outside the boundary of the firm, so to say, you can still create like organizational structures where they can hire and recruit people depending on the task at hand. And I was just wondering, like, what is your view on that? Like, we talked about types of work where you can hire a freelancer. For instance, Verticent's project business model is where you bring the entire project to Verticent, and Verticent is going to compose a team for you. And what is your view there? Like, what are the different models out there in this ecosystem of open talent and the players there to see, like, okay, what is the best way to structure work in this new era where we don't have this button seat mentality anymore that some of my interviewees spoke about, but you can basically create your own organizational structures?
Yeah, I mean, we follow kind of what I've always preached, which is, you want to have a work structure and an org structure that matches what you do. So for us, we're a services firm, as you mentioned, that does highly complex work. And so for me, I want to have the best possible team at all times. So we have our own talent platform that either brings in and screens employees, brings in and screens freelancers. I also partner with other firms and other freelance talent pools to just assemble every time the best team. And right, what's unique for us and the value we bring is A, the ability to do that, but B, we have a lot of technology, a lot of IP, and a lot of expertise that we bring to bear to solve client problems. And that doesn't mean that I need to have every single person working for me. And my expertise may not be to find certain skill sets or certain things. So we actually have a very flexible talent pool that some of the folks are our core employees. Some of the folks are people we have in an informal network, and some come from platforms and other sources. And we mix those and assemble those into a work team. And what we find is that it gives us the flexibility for me running a business to be able to flex based on demand and specific skill needs, right? Because those vary wildly. But also, we always know it's not typically in a services firm like mine that's more traditional, you kind of get the team the firm has, not necessarily the team you need, right? Because it's like, well, I have these 3 people on the bench and I think they can do it. And they might be the right skill set. And like, we'll trust that they're going to work hard and get it done. Whereas in a flexible model, you can say, no, I need these exact things. And I'm geared to make sure I have an avenue to find those specific skill sets. So we can be much more precise in the team we deliver while kind of more flexibly managing our business. And then I think from a talent perspective, it gives people not the opportunity to be shoehorned into a role because that's what the need is right now, but they can focus on what they want to do, whatever that is. And so different people have different priorities. Some people want to be part of building a business. Some people want to hone their craft. Some people want variability. And I think from a business perspective, it's a much better way to manage a business. But also I think from a team perspective, you get the best possible team, which will drive the best possible outcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really fascinating. And let's see if we have some questions from the audience. Minji, can you tell us a bit if we got some questions coming in?
Yeah, thank you, Greta. We have received a lot of interesting questions from the audience. I'll just summarize some of the questions. Paul and Jenny, you talked about the importance of open talent as a form for organization information. And Jenny, you mentioned Deloitte has been hiring a data scientist, data talent to help with your organization's work. So one of the questions that our audience have, what do you think about the future of data science careers?
I can take that one. I think it's super interesting. I think there is a ton of opportunity in the data science space to work in a lot of different ways. So when it comes to the future of data science careers, I think if we're talking about just on-demand talent as a whole versus full-time, I think you're going to see a bit of both. I think you need certain roles within companies to be full-time. I don't think that's ever going to change. But I do think that there are going to be a lot more opportunities for people to work in an on-demand fashion to support both, open source work and to support private work that organizations need support with, to help with specific algorithms and be sort of outcomes-driven approaches. And I do think, speaking to what Michael Kearns was speaking about, is you're going to see a lot more teaming of people from different areas, whether it's some full-time people with a few different freelancers or bringing in a few different freelancers from varying backgrounds to support in different ways. So overall, I think there's a ton of opportunity in the space, both full-time and freelance-wise, and we'll see kind of where that goes.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Do we have time for another question?
Sure, go ahead.
So we've also received some concerns from the audience saying that while hiring from anywhere may be possible, but it might subject to certain type of careers. So I guess this question is more for Adam. Do you have any stats on how much of the labor market that remote work is sustainable? Are there any type of works that can be done remotely? Are there any certain types of works that cannot be operationalized as easily?
So it's a great question. It's easiest to focus on sort of one labor market where we have good data. So I'm going to talk about the US context here. And what's interesting is before the pandemic, you had estimates that maybe a third of jobs could be done remotely. But then in the heart of the pandemic, 60% of jobs were done remotely. So that tells you that almost double the amount of jobs that we thought could be done remotely were, at least on an emergency basis, being done remotely. And still today, we have about a third of jobs being done remotely. So I think that tells you that it's tough to look at what was done before and say, can we do these jobs remotely? Because it turns out that just looking at, the way companies are organized and structured sort of underestimated the percent of remote work that can be done when you make changes around how you work. Long run, I think we're probably going to be looking at maybe 20% of jobs being done remotely. And that's like where I think we'll be, in a couple of years. Is you're going to continue to see people go back to work slowly. The remote share is declining, but I do think that a lot of these jobs are going to stay remote. If you want to know what kinds of jobs are going to be more remote, it's professional jobs. There is an education gradient here. More skilled work tends to be more remotable. I think the least sort of remotable jobs are going to tend to be in sales. When you're talking about, sort of higher paying opportunities, sales continues to be a very face-to-face activity. You also might have, some jobs at the high innovation sort of hands-on technology that continue to be face-to-face, where you need to be, around equipment, around remote, around equipment, around the whiteboard. But I think if you look at management and professional occupations in general, that's where you're going to find, whether it's finance, architectural engineering, those remain relatively high, computer science, programming. So this is why a lot of the tech companies seem, extremely comfortable with sending at least a good chunk of their workers to live wherever. So I hope that helps. It's a tough question. It's really going to be job by job, but as like an overview, those are the kind of the trends you can look for.
But I would just say, Adam, I agree with you. And I think that it's amazing to see how many things that weren't possible to be done remotely even a year or two ago are becoming more and more. Like I saw, I think it was Caterpillar. They have machines where people are kind of running mining machines far, far away from the mine, for example. And so I think that would have been something where we'd say, like, driving a machine in a mine, you can't remote that, but a year or two later, it's remote. Surgeries, some are being done remote. So more and more things are getting done remotely every day.
Great, and I think this is a very nice segue into the second theme we're discussing today with our great panel, and that is looking at matching. Like in many of the things you brought up, we brought up this topic of matching people with jobs, which is kind of the essence of recruitment. And let's zoom a bit into the potential there of AI, of artificial intelligence, to help there to leverage technology for giving the right job to the right worker and finding that right worker for the right task at hand. And as we have witnessed with GAFAM platforms, those are like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, we see that the network technologies of platforms, and in particular their algorithmic matching of supply and demand across the globe, really has the potential to disrupt industries. But what about platforms for work, for online work, remote work that we're talking about today? And Adam, let's start with you first. Like, how do online labor platforms actually leverage that AI and big data for matching people with jobs? And what are the implications for the processes of selection and recruitment, for instance?
It's a great question. So let me talk about, sort of three things here. One is, why are these platforms kind of ripe for machine learning type analysis? Two is, like, what are the problems? And three is, what are the limitations? So the why are we finding algorithms useful? Why are we finding machine learning algorithms, AI, whatever you want to call it? Why are they useful here? It's really a lot to do with the nature of the data. So when you have a traditional data set in statistics is based on a lot of individuals and a few observations on those individuals. So you would have, like, think of census data. You'd have a couple million people and you'd know a couple dozen things about them. So it's a long data set. In platforms, what we have are wide data sets. Now, we do have a lot of people, but the amount of people that we have is just dwarfed by the information that we know about them. So if I wanted to, it'd be very trivial for me to create a data set where I had millions of variables, like just measuring, daily activities of people, search behavior, all their work experience, all their job posting, applying. So it's like a really, really wide data set. And that really lends itself to machine learning techniques where you don't necessarily know what are your independent variables of interest. So you know who the people are, but you don't know what it is about them that you want to be looking at. So that's why I think that there have been a lot of important use cases for machine learning in this context, and compared to traditional statistics. So that's sort of the why. The what, there are a lot of contexts in a two-sided global labor market where machine learning algorithms are potentially useful. I'll give you a couple examples. One is basically for every one person who makes it onto the Upwork platform, there's like 100 who apply. And so it's really in demand in that sense, that people want to come here to work as a freelancer because there's a lot of great work to be done. And so deciding how we let people through the gate, who is a high potential freelancer, how do we let them in? There's a lot of role for algorithms there. Another important context is when a client is searching for a freelancer, what do we show them? So when someone's searching on Google for something, all you have to do is figure out what is the most relevant answer, right? That's it. Just maximize relevancy, right? And then get rid of scams or something like that. It's much more difficult on a two-sided labor market platform because you don't have to just worry about relevancy. You also have to worry about availability. And so if you just show people the most relevant freelancers, you're going to show them, the people who are busiest because they're relevant for a lot of people. They have a lot of experience, and you're going to end up with a lot of clients who just keep being directed to the same top rated freelancers who have like more work they could possibly do, and they're not seeing the freelancers who are actually available. So this is an important place for algorithms where you need to sort of trade off this availability versus relevancy, right? That's a complicated question. You need to know a lot about the people on both sides of the market there, and how do you trade off these things? So those are two important contexts for machine learning, but I do think that there are some really important caveats to this for people to understand. Is that one is that we still, even with all the information that we have, we are still subject to the problem identified by Hayek, the economist, 87 years ago, which is limitations of information. Information is incredibly dispersed. We will never know everything about these freelancers that they know about themselves. We will never know everything about clients that they know about themselves. And there's so much heterogeneity in a marketplace like this. Even when you're focused on, like, take a very narrow segment of the marketplace. Here's a very particular kind of job in freelancer. There's massive amount of heterogeneity there in terms of how skilled of a person are you looking for, how experienced of a person are you looking for, and you're never going to overcome this with data. So it's important to sort of scope out what you do with algorithms. And I think as a general rule, it's algorithms are really great. Machine learning is really great for giving people information to make their decisions. But if you try to start making decisions for people, you're not going to have enough information to do that, regardless how big your data set is. And you're also, if you're not doing it right, you're going to make people, start working against the algorithms. And if the algorithms don't work for them, they're not going to reveal accurate information about themselves. So you need the algorithms to provide information. You need them to be what economists call incentive compatible. So you want them to be revealing truthful information about themselves. And in a lot of cases, and this is my other caveat here, a lot of cases you want to not necessarily be using algorithms, but using market-based mechanisms. The price system, auctions, these things utilize mass distributed information to people. When you have people sort of bidding on an outcome, they are using all of their information to decide what it's worth in a way that algorithms could never bring in the same amount of information. So that's my idea of like the potential, the universe. There's so many interesting uses for algorithms, but what we do with them, what we don't do with them, and the limitations of them is just as important, if not more important, than what we do with them. So I would keep Hayek in mind. I would keep the importance of markets and prices in mind. Those are, I think, some important lessons.
Thank you so much, Adam. That's really fascinating what you were describing here. And yeah, when we think about like the market that is being disrupted by these online labor platforms that are coming into the space, we, as the name says, we can think of the labor market itself, but we can also think of the staffing industry, the hiring of temporary employees. And John, for staffing companies, this idea of open talent is nothing new, right? It's at the beginning of the staffing industry, but perhaps the use of technology, how that's being used by platforms and these platform business models, perhaps does bring some novelty there. And perhaps you can explain to us how is the staffing world responding to these developments? How does Kelly adapt to this new world of work? And is there still a role to play for people and brick and mortar intermediary organizations in personnel recruitment?
It's a very, very fun conversation, Greta, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts on it. And you know, what I would encourage people to do is maybe just pause and think about history for a little bit. You know, there's been conversation how this market is not necessarily new. It's maybe an evolution of where we are. If you think of supplemental labor or non-internal, non-full-time employee labor, it began with maybe seasonal labor being brought into organizations. It goes back to post-World War II when the industry really formed itself. And then you saw the consulting organizations coming in. You saw white-collar talent becoming something that was more in need, and that was there. And now all of a sudden, you know, offshoring became a big piece, and then outsourcing became a big piece. This is simply just another evolution, accessing talent, whether it's individuals or it's clusters or teams in a different way. So the idea of a labor market intermediary or a third party kind of aiding and assisting, the platforms have become another medium for doing that. We still have, Deloitte is still an active third-party intermediary. A lot of our organizations go out to Deloitte and use them as a consultant to help us. But they've learned that using third-party labor, using the platform, has been a better way to provide the services that they have, create new and different pieces. Instead of having to go to a Deloitte to get any project or outcome-based activity, Michael and Versant are bringing together teams to help you bring something together in a different way. So we're seeing organizations adapt in different ways. Traditional temporary staffing companies, if all you're doing is matching resumes to buzzwords in a job description, then you're offering no value. So any intermediary has to evolve their value proposition to bring something new into the market. Where I think the technology question gets really interesting, and Kurt had a comment in the Q&A about just being tired of you know, just buzzwords being blown at them from resumes and job postings. Well, that's what AI can do very well for us. AI can take care of the match part. If I want to get my buzzwords of the job description to match your buzzwords in your work history, that's a pretty easy thing to do right now. The algorithms have gotten smart enough on it. There's enough volume going through there. But what I think we miss when we think about it, and I think Adam hit a little bit on this, is the difference between a match, that you have the technical capabilities and skills necessary to do the work, and fit. Is this the right thing for me at this point in time? Different organizations are going to identify different things that are going to stand out. They're going to create different opportunities, whether you're joining in with an early adopter or someone who has been a laggard and moving through something, whether you need to just be closer to home or have greater flexibility in your schedule, whether you want to be full-time versus part-time, all different aspects of the human psychology of why this work, not this job, but this piece of work is right for me at this point in time, constructed in this contractual relationship. And that's where you're going to still see kind of the role of the human. You're going to still see the role of the intermediary in some way. And if you just want evidence, look at the highest paid people we have across our world. There are athletes and our entertainers. And how many of them don't have an agent? You know, when you're looking at, you know, the top football players and wondering who they're going to go to, and who's negotiating the contract. You know what? Everyone needs a good midfielder. Everyone needs a goal scorer. Okay, but what is the right fit for me? And what's going to be right for my family, for my personal life, for everything I want, not the things that are in my job description or my CV. So that becomes a really big part of it. And the other piece I would just kind of offer into this is that the technology is going to have to go beyond the AI and the machine learning side of things. We've got to look to the distributed data to build out a much broader ecosystem. So if you want to get into blockchain technology, we can have some fun in going through that. But the idea of having a broader marketplace that allow people to interact and allow for greater trust in the security of information and in the privacy of information and in the control of my personal information. The information about who I am and what makes me make the choices that I make in my work history and my life history. Those are things that are going to really stand out and candidly to me going to create some massive opportunity. So, for all the students that are on the line and are thinking about, okay, so how do I leverage this and create a business in here? What do I want to spawn? I would be thinking about which groups you can be bringing together that can impact a whole ecosystem versus solving an individual problem for an individual person or an individual element of the process right now. So I think there's some higher level thinking that needs to take place beyond just the what can I do right now. We've got a whole way of how people connect with work that is changing radically and being enabled in a much more positive way than it ever has been, if we can get there.
Thank you so much, John. Really great. And we also have Paul here, and so great to have you. And he's very eager to jump in the conversation. Please go ahead, Paul.
Well, I just wanted to build on two things. John said an important word, and Adam did as well. Outcome-based. A lot of what companies are looking for now is outcomes. And so they're trying to then work backwards to try to figure that out. And all of us on the call now expect things on demand. And so when you look at those changes, one of the things, we're in the first inning of these labor platforms providing value to large organizations. But one thing that I'm starting to see all over the market is the vertical integration of companies bringing experts into their processes. It was, a couple of years ago that IKEA bought TaskRabbit because it seemed that not everybody wanted to build their own IKEA furniture. We're seeing it in TurboTax. If you ever used an Intuit product, in fact, I use Mint to track my financials. And yesterday on demand, I was connected with Chuck, who is a 22 years of experience of being a CPA. And we worked over some of my financial questions that I had. So you're starting to see broad organizations bring in experts on demand to help customers with those outcomes. And so when you look at the labor platforms, you actually have to start looking at large SaaS companies who are building that out. You see it with AWS IQ, GoDaddy, which is a big web service here, has GoDaddy Pro. Grammarly, I don't know how many people use Grammarly, but they have writers inside that product. And the interesting thing that happens with those writers, they're there to help customers, but they're also there to make the algorithms better. They're there to help build intent-based AI. And so one of the things that we experienced when I was at Microsoft is, did we know what the business intents that customers were trying to do? And you looked at all of the data that the company had, and it was the templates that a customer told us, hey, I'm having a birthday, so I need a birthday card, or I'm doing a sales thing. And we looked and we created Microsoft Experts, where we put designers and other experts in the actual products. And so I think as you think about on demand, there will be back office type of work that companies need, and they'll start to use more cloud-based staffing agencies, on-demand labor platforms. But on the other side, they're going to start putting people in their products, independent workers, freelancers, who are experts in that domain that's represented by that company, and they're curated by the company. You go and look at a company like TopTal, one of the magic things that they do is they do high curation of their labor pool. It's the top 3%, so that when they place a freelancer it's guaranteed that it'll probably be a fit because they've done that work. And so we're starting to see that with AWS IQ, who says, look, I'm going to go qualify all of these amazing cloud experts, and I'm going to apply them to AWS. It's similar to what Mr. Kearns is doing over at Vertison. So I encourage people that are thinking about this space to think more broadly beyond the labor platforms and the transformation of staffing, and look at how companies are vertically integrating using gig economy strategies. Because every other day I open a SaaS product, I use Asana to do all my project work, and there was an expert there saying, hey, set up some time. So I set up 30 minutes with a woman in actually Pennsylvania, where Adam's from. And so start to look at that trend, because it is something that's happening, and it's all designed to capture data and help the organization create differentiation and a moat.
And this, Paul, I believe, is what you also see as part of this bigger thing, right? The digital transformation of work. And, like when you talk about putting people into products, on the one hand, if I would be a worker, I would be a bit scared. And this kind of brings me to the question, like this new model of works that are emerging, and they offer significant advantages like freedom and flexibility and autonomy and remote work, enabling you to better integrate your work life with your home life. It also brings challenges. And one of them is that it kind of clashes with established norms and expectations in society. For instance, when we think about social benefits or pensions. And I was just wondering, like, how do freelancers experience this transformation? And what is your advice for people who perhaps are considering a freelance career?
Yeah, I think it depends where you live in the world. I mean, you're in Sweden, where the social contract with employees is very different than here in the US. And I think in a lot of ways, the friction and the conversation about inequality in the US is really about this idea of how do we allow people, should benefits be tied to a job, which is still a very odd concept, and it's got a whole history to it. I think for everyone, it's a personal decision. I know many people who later in their career, like I was a freelancer for a bit of time, and but my wife had a job, and so we were able to rely on those benefits. And so I think there are some people who are early in their career, and their risk profile is different, and the benefits that they need are different. I do think that more and more people are starting to ask the question, and that's why I think it's more of a portfolio career. I think we're going to start pushing against these corporate policies. It used to be called the bad, you can't moonlight. And then somewhere it became side hustle, which was cool. And so you're side hustling. I think more people are going to have a portfolio career and then go all in maybe on one thing, and it happens over time. So for me, I continued to try a bunch of different things and said, hey, I'm going to make a move. But it was a 4-year sort of transition. I would never encourage someone to just jump without experiencing and really working. The other thing is, everybody's going to be a brand. This idea that you're going to have to put yourself out there and that some resume is going to somehow define you. If you put yourself out on LinkedIn and the social media platforms and you become a brand, opportunities come to you. And so I don't think we're in a world anymore where people are just able to have their resumes and then put it into some system and apply for a job. You've got to be proactive and really have a unique point of view and brand yourself, just very much like you've done. And many people come and ask your advice and insight. So that's the advice that I would give people.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. And Minji, I was just wondering, do we have some questions coming in from the audience?
Yes, we are. Thanks, Greta. It seems like our viewers are both excited about, but also skeptical of using artificial intelligence for recruitment. So I'll take the liberty of summarizing the questions again. We talked about the positive side. Now let's look at the dark side of artificial intelligence. What might be the ethical and legal implications for organizations? And as more companies starting to leverage the benefits of artificial intelligence, it seems like more jobs will become precarious. Would it be possible to have a balanced interest between the recruiters and the employees? Thanks.
I'll offer in on that, Minji. I think that the ethics of what we're looking at with artificial intelligence, and particularly machine learning right now, is something that we have to really keep an eye on, particularly when we're looking at social justice issues and equity issues. all over the place. Algorithms are programmed by human beings. And one of the scariest things to me is the number of individuals who come to me promoting that they've got a new business because they have an algorithm with zero data that's been run against it, and they think it's going to solve the world's problems. Algorithms, and the algorithms that are making a difference right now are ones that are having massive amounts of data run through them to test and challenge against those biases that are built in, and then relearning against the biases that are there. You heard the reference earlier to the idea that the platform just keeps telling you, keep coming back to the same 4 freelancers over and over and over. Well, that's not the right answer if you have an emerging and growing marketplace. So we need to change some things in there. So I think how we use AI in organizations is something that every large organization and every large enterprise is really paying a lot of attention to. The lawsuits haven't come out yet. All of the lawsuits that say, a bias has been created against me because the machine said X. That's going to come up. That is one of those course correction points that is going to occur in this marketplace. Where is it going to be? We'll learn along the way. But I think that's what you're seeing, particularly HR organizations say, let's wade into this carefully. Let's let the algorithms give us maybe a projected answer, but then let's use our brains and think about this and think, is that the right answer? How do we feel about that emotionally? It's back to that. Match versus fit. Is it the right thing? How do I feel about this? And maybe challenge, do I need to look at that again? So I think that's the piece to just tread carefully in as we go forward with this technology is to not become overly dependent, and also to look at where that cross collaboration is taking place that can really ensure that the algorithms we become more and more dependent on are being trained by new and variant sources of data along the way.
Yeah, I think, John, just to jump in, Amazon actually is a great use case. They had secretly built a recruiting tool that was biased against women. And so if you just look at that case, here's a big company with all the resources in the world and all the smartest data people in the world that's unearthing those challenges, and they shut down the tool. And so we're starting to see the use cases, just not the lawsuits yet. But
even to Paul's point there, part of that program started because they were evaluating job descriptions, that the job descriptions, the physical job descriptions most of our companies have, were also written with bias against women. That's right. And so it's not that the technology has created something bad. The technology exposed a problem that was there. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to allow yourself to continue to enhance the problem? Or are you going to change what you're doing? The way we connect people with work is backwards in a lot of cases. We're still in a marketplace where we tend to think that the job order or the job description demand is key. Well, in what Adam referenced earlier, we have segments of the marketplace where the supply-demand equation is completely upside down. If you are one of those data scientists, there is a lot more demand than there are of you. So you have the power in that relationship to explore what's going to be possible. Well, if the system is programmed in a linear way with an assumption that demand equals power, something is broken there. So we've got to be willing to re-engineer some processes and how we think about that. That's the power to the person right now, to rethink and change the way systems are running. And that's the challenge to corporations, is to think differently.
Thank you so much, John. And this also refers back to what Adam brought up about how AI is really good in providing information, but letting the algorithms make the decision is another question. And with that, I think it's about the hour. So over to Eero. I invite you to close the seminar. Eero, you're still muted.
I'm getting so excited, and I wish we had another hour for the conversation. But wow, thanks Greta for really sharing this conversation, and I've been learning a great deal. Got some really great answers to the questions, but perhaps even more importantly, this has triggered a whole lot of new ideas and questions, both more academic and more practical. So I'm really glad that we heard about the enabling and constraining aspects of gig economy and the open talent logic, but also about the problems and challenges that this poses for individuals and the new kinds of organizations that are developing and those who are developing and managing those. And also really glad that we had this conversation just a moment ago about the darker side of things. So all these are really important issues in practice, but also offer a lot of opportunities for scholars in this area. So wow, I just hope that I'm sure that we will have the conversation going, even if we have to be closing this session in a few seconds. So at this point, I just want to again thank you, Greta, and thank you all the panelists and the audience for the great discussion. And this leaves me with one thing to do, which is to advertise the next episode of Leadership in Extraordinary Times. And the next time will be on the 17th of November, so soon enough. It's going to be on Cheap Talk, living up to the Business Roundtable statement. And the chair will be taken by Peter Tufano, our dean. And the panelists will include Alison Binns, who is Executive Director in Sustainability Research at Morgan Stanley, Hiro Mizuno, who's Executive in Residence at Side Business School, and Bob Eccles, who's Visiting Professor at our school as well. Now, all the details about this, as well as the recordings of this great conversation, can be found on our website. With that, thank you all for joining, and goodbye.